director of Ignatius Productions. A lot of you know about Ignatius Productions through Father Mitch. And she knows Father Mitch pretty well, you can say. So she's got every bit a good sense of humor as Father Mitch does. So you can imagine it's going to be a fun night as well as a very deep night as well. But it's going to be a fun night as well. Jacquie is the regional coordinator for Silent No More Awareness, which is the national campaign started by Priests for Life, which helps men and women who are recovering from participating in abortion and provides healing for those who have participated in any way, whether by actual participation in an abortion or by encouraging others to perform abortions. We've all supported the culture of death in some way, and so it helps us all heal from the sin. So without any further ado, I want to give you Jacquie right now.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here this evening with all of you. I have two very special anniversaries I want to tell you about to begin with before I even get started. A year ago today, I was actually at Rachel's Vineyard, going through the beginning stages of the healing process for my abortion that took place almost 23 years ago. It'll be 23 years in January. So if you can imagine, I look out at you folks and I think to myself, my daughter would have been close to your age. So it's very powerful for me to be here, especially on this anniversary. And 1 month ago today, I was at the National Monument for the Unborn and had the opportunity to finally honor my daughter in a way that I never thought that I could, and that was by putting her nameplate up on the wall with the rest of there's 35,000 of them up there right now. But I heard a statistic the other day that there are 37 trillion aborted children from 1977 to the year 2000. And we wonder why our world is in the situation that it's in economically, and that's one of the reasons why. We haven't added the past 9 years numbers to that number. So just kind of keep that in your mind as I talk to you and realize that unfortunately I'm not alone, and I wish I was, but this is where it is. I'll start off by telling you a funny story that Teresa's going to love, because I've threatened her in 2 emails that I had a funny story about when I get up and speak. I have this little piece of paper that just has a couple of notes on it. I traditionally don't prepare anything. And I get a little unnerved sometimes. I never get nervous, but I get a little unnerved that sometimes I'm going to say the wrong thing, and then I always have my friends Keith and Kathleen that tell me, Jacquie, it's your life. How can you screw up talking about that? Okay, so we'll go with that. Several years ago, I did the pageant circuit when I was going through college, and I wanted to do it. I had always wanted to do it since I was a little girl, and so my parents said, well, we really don't know how to go about doing this, but we'll help you achieve whatever it is you set out to do. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because of the scholarship money that they made available to you at that point. And that was back in the day when things were a little bit more modest than they are now, and I would safely say then the pageant system is very different than it is now. We didn't do swimsuit competition and that type of thing. You had to have a talent, and you sang or you danced or you did something a little bit more modest. So it was approved by my dad to do that. One of the preliminaries I had to do before going to Miss USA was a speech competition. And my parents knew that anytime that I would graduate to the next step to prepare for the preliminaries, it was a family meeting because it involved wardrobe, hair, makeup, getting ready, studying current events, the whole 9 yards. And they wanted to make sure that I had everything that I needed, all the resources, etc. The one thing that they never did was ask me if I had rehearsed enough. And because they thought, if you're going to get up and make an idiot of yourself, then that's going to be you, and it's not going to be us, and that's just the way how you want to learn to compete. So when I went to the speech competition, we were on our way there. It was a 3-hour drive. And we had everything in the car that we needed, and my mother turns around and she says, so lay it on us. And I said, lay what? And she said, the speech. And I go, I don't have it yet. Now granted, we've spent insurance fees, money on everything else, had to have sponsors. I had my dad would make me go out and raise the money to do this. And I didn't have my speech, which was the main reason we were going. The rule was there were 6 judges, and you had to have 6 copies of your speech, double-spaced on white plain paper. It was probably supposed to be anywhere from 12 to 15 pages long. in manila envelopes. And as soon as you would check in, you would hand that over, and they would spread it out to the judges. And then during the 3 days you were there, the judges would have an opportunity to read what you wrote and judge you based upon your articulation, everything you put together. And there was a subject that was identified to you. I checked in and handed the envelopes out. They had blank pieces of paper inside. And 2 days later, after all the rehearsals, everybody's in their hot rollers and you're doing all these things and you're practicing these dance moves and learning all these songs. And the night of the competition, we're in the morning of the night of the competition, and one of the judges comes to me and he says, Jackie, we need to talk. I said, okay. And I knew at that moment, I knew what was going to happen. He said, we think we're going to have to disqualify you. And I said, okay. And he said, and you know why? And I go, I do. But could we just do something? And he said, well, what's that? And I said, could you just let me participate? Don't judge me, because my parents are going to kill me if they find out. Because we've been there for 2 days. And he said, well, I don't know. We're going to have to check into it and see. So I said, well, see what you can do. So I go back to rehearsal, and he comes in, and I get this. I go over outside of the ballroom at the hotel. He goes, we're going to let you do it, but we're not judging you. I said, okay, that's great. So that night, it was my turn, and I go out in the middle of the floor, and I'm standing there, and I open my mouth, and the Holy Spirit literally took over. And that's when I first knew what the Holy Spirit was. It just, my mouth opened. I did not have a rehearsed speech. It was all literally in my head, and it just started coming out. And I look over at my parents, and they're both like this. My brother gets up and leaves. He was so sick, he had to go throw up in the bathroom because he was so nervous. And his little sister, he was afraid I was going to really screw up, I guess. But it was a really interesting time. And I ended up winning that night because the other girls that had prepared, they weren't able to deliver. And so they would just get up in the middle of the floor and they would just stand there and they'd look around like something was going to magically hit them. And then they would be able to speak. And that never happened for them. So I ended up winning anyway, even though I kind of broke the rules. But that was kind of the beginning of the end for me, having that type of luck, if you will, because shortly after that, I retired the crown 2 years later. I went to Miss USA, did very, very well, and that was when I thought that I had the world by the hand. So this is where my story kind of begins for you. It was right after I was out of college. I moved to Washington, D.C., and I had a great job. I interviewed, I was one of 500 people. They were only going to take 12 of us, and I made it. So I went to New York City, thought I was going to be a fashion designer, traveled all the way down to Washington, but helped open up a Macy's store. It was the first store out of New York that they were testing in that area, and I met a guy. And we had premarital sex, which is something I will tell you from the very beginning, don't even think about doing. Because the very moment that you participate in that, your life will change forever. Emotionally, psychologically, physically. And the same thing can happen to you that happened to me. And those thoughts go through your mind. So 22 years ago, I made a choice, and I thought it was the only choice that I had. I had gotten pregnant. When I went to the boyfriend and told him about it, the very first thing he said to me is, it's your life or the baby's, but we have to take care of it. So I thought about it for a while, and I thought, I'm really selfish. I really don't want to have this go on in my life right now because of everything that's happening. My life has been great. I'm coming off of having this national title. I've got this great job. It was very selfish. It was all about me. And I didn't realize the magnitude of what was about to happen to me until it was way too late. I was driven to the abortion clinic that morning. He had a gun in the car that day. And he said to me, if you don't come out with that child aborted, I will take your life. When you get into the mindset that you actually step foot into the lobby of one of these clinics, your mind is already gone. There's no reasoning with you. The sidewalk counselors can tell you whatever they want to tell you. They can't change your mind. The very second that you stepped into there, the reason it was different for me than it is for some of the women now is because they do sonograms now. Back then they didn't. And they told me, we can fix your problem. You have a band-aided problem. We can help you discard your problem. And I didn't understand the magnitude of that word, discard, until I got dressed and was getting ready to leave. And I saw a little jar on the counter, and I realized, oh my gosh, that was my child. It was my parents' grandchild. It was my brother's niece. It was my niece and nephew's cousin. And it was a child of God, and I had literally destroyed it. And ultimately, I'm the one that made the choice to do that. It didn't matter how much pressure he had put on me. It didn't matter what was said to me. Those people told me, we can fix this for you. You'll recover from it. You'll never even know. You can go out the next day and not a problem. Not the case. I walked out into the lobby after this procedure took place, and there was no numbing, there was no anesthesia, there was no pain medicine, there was nothing. I can tell you the very second that that child died inside my body and how it felt as it was coming out. When I walked out into the lobby, I expected him to be there waiting for me, and he wasn't. So I walked down the stairs, I walked across the street, and this was, if you've ever been to where Bethesda Naval Hospital is, there's a building right next to it, and that's where this took place. So it's a pretty affluent area, and you don't expect this type of place to be there. And I'm walking across the street thinking, well, maybe he's parked in the parking garage across the street. So as I'm literally in the middle of 4 lanes of traffic going through the middle of town in Bethesda, I collapsed in the middle of the street. I had to be taken by ambulance to a hospital. I lost almost 8 units of blood. The female body takes 10.5 units of blood to function. So I almost bled to death and was not able to tell anybody about it. My parents didn't know, my friends didn't know, no one knew but this guy. So once I recovered from that, I went back to work. I held this inside. My body was very different. Everything was changing. I couldn't understand what was going on. Psychologically, I was a basket case for years. I spent thousands of dollars going to counselor after counselor after counselor, and that started to play tricks with me as well, because every time I got to a point where a counselor would start to go down a different road with me, and they would start to say the same thing that the prior counselor had said, and want to medicate me on something else, I would change my mind and say, well, I can't go back and see that one, now I'll go find another one. So I got into this whole ordeal of therapy counseling and jumping from counselor to counselor to counselor, so it was almost like shopping. You know, you go from one to the other. When they start to tell you something you don't want to hear, you go to the next one to see what they're going to tell you. And then you start to realize, well, they're all telling me the same things, but it's never anything that's addressing what the actual issue is. Not one of them ever asked me, are you post-abortive? Not one of them asked me, do you have a child? Did you have a child? Did your child die? None of these questions. It was all about relationships with my family. Well, the relationships with my family were a problem because I had started to behave differently. You start to behave in a lot of secretive kind of ways, trying to hide what you've done, because when your parents look at you, they know that something's very different. Your whole demeanor changes. And people can look at you and say, oh, you don't look the same, you're not acting the same, and you're like, oh, no, it's okay. People know that something's wrong. So I went, this